Good evening, everyone. Welcome to White Collar Support Group. This is our Tuesday night speaker series, and our speaker tonight is Brian Cuban, author of the new novel, The Body Brokers, which just launched this last week. And we all have our copies right here. And I'm happy to tell you that we were able to send about 40 copies of The Body Brokers into our White Collar Support Group members who are in the various prisons around the country. So we're happy to do that. We love supporting Brian and we love supporting his work, and he's been a great friend of our group. So let's start with some announcements. Only one really. This event tonight is brought to you by the White Collar Support Group that meets on Monday nights. We've been doing it for the last 9 years. We've had over 440 meetings, and we've had over 1,200 participants. If you want more information about it, you can find it on our website at prisonist.org. That's prisonist, like feminist.org. And we'd be happy to welcome you, or if you know somebody who is having a white collar criminal justice issue, please refer them to us, and we'd be happy to give them some support completely free of charge. So tonight we have our guest speaker is Brian Cuban. Brian is the younger brother of Dallas Mavericks owner and entrepreneur Mark Cuban. He's a Dallas-based attorney, author, and addiction and recovery advocate. He's a graduate of Penn State University and the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. Brian has been in long-term recovery from alcohol, cocaine, and bulimia since April of 2007. He currently resides in Dallas with his wife and 2 cats. And I can tell you, in case nobody realized, when we started these Tuesday night speaker series events, Brian was actually our first speaker when his last book came out. So we're thrilled to have him back and to be talking about his story, to update us and to tell us about his new book. And then he'd be happy to answer questions. Of course, you can share after. So Brian, take it away. And I will get back on when Brian's done. So thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Jeff. And obviously, I'm here to talk about my journey, not the book. So my journey has taken me through alcoholism, addiction, a near suicide attempt, 3 failed marriages, one more, I get a free set of steak knives, and then in jail. And it's been quite the journey. I lost my legal career and really was on the precipice of not being alive. And to give you a flavor for how things were for me as a practicing lawyer in the midst of the insanity of addiction, quote unquote insanity of addiction, let's all go back to June of 2006. The Dallas Mavericks are going to the NBA championship for the very first time. My brother Mark had bought the team in 2000, and we had had some success, but this was our first trip to the big show. And as you might imagine, I was going to get some pretty good seats for those games. I also had the opportunity to get a couple of tickets for friends. I called up my brother. He said, "Sure, Bri, come on over." He gave me the tickets. You think I gave them to my friends? Nope. You're probably thinking I sold them on eBay for some astronomical amount. Thinking like a lawyer, I didn't do that either. I didn't do that because that would have been disrespectful to Mark, to myself, to the team, to the city. I took those tickets and traded them to my cocaine dealer for $1,000 in blow, really celebrating the championship in my 20th year as a practicing lawyer. My dealer selling them on eBay, right, was disrespectful, but trading them to my cocaine dealer, perfectly acceptable. How the mind works in addiction. My dealer shows up at my house. I was high class. He delivered. I give him the tickets. He gives me this giant baggie of blow. I go running up to my home office. I dump it all out, this little mountain of blow. I'm looking at it like I'm Scarface. I wanted to go, I rub my nose in it. And I take out the dollar bill and I take the credit card, line out a few rails. And cocaine users, we're kind of an ironic bunch, especially coming out of a pandemic. You wash your hands, you use the Purell, but we'll stick a dollar bill up our nose that's been used by God knows who and has God knows what on it. Go figure. But cocaine had long stopped giving me the feeling of self-love and confidence that I achieved when I did it in a bathroom for the first time in Dallas, Texas in the summer of 1987, and loved myself for the first time in my young life, but with the aid of cocaine. Now it was just pain and shame and paranoia. Do I hear the cops outside? Woo, woo, woo. I go peeking out my nailed shut curtains. They're literally nailed shut. There's no one out there, but now I'm paranoid. I hide the cocaine in the closet. I drive to a home improvement store where I buy electrical faceplate outlets, a drill, and a saw. I drive back to my house. I go upstairs to the closets in the bedrooms, the drywall, and I cut fake electrical outlets in all these closets. I take the cocaine, I put it in smaller Ziploc baggies, put it behind the drywall, seal it back up, thinking I'm the smartest lawyer ever. Like the DEA, the cops, and the drug dogs have never thought of that one before. I go and rail out a few more lines, but again, just pain and chasing this high, that was never going to come again. That first high where I loved myself. And those highs became lesser and lesser until it was just always just the bad, the jitters and shame and pain. And it was never an epiphany that maybe I have a problem. It was maybe I need to change dealers. Maybe I need to change out the Grey Goose for the Jack Daniels. Maybe I shouldn't be so paranoid. Do I hear the cops outside again? There's no one out there. I go back to those electrical outlets about an hour and a half later. I take all the cocaine out. I put it back in the giant Ziploc baggie. I go to my master bathroom and flush it down the toilet. The next morning comes. I wake up. I'm staring at the ceiling. Wait a minute. Did I flush all my blow down the toilet? There's another game tonight. I'm an idiot. I call up my brother again. I get 2 more tickets. I call up my dealer again. He shows up at my house. He said, dude, you did all that last night? I didn't want to tell him I flushed it down the toilet like a moron. I said, yes, give me more. I did it all. He said, okay, here you go. Gives me a new bag of cocaine. Back up to my home office, rinse, wash, repeat, dump it out one more time, line it out. Just chasing the high, chasing the high, chasing the high, chasing the feeling. And then the paranoia. This time I lasted 2 hours. Back to the electrical outlets, put it back in, then take it back out later on. Go back to that same bathroom, drop to my knees where I had done like I had done so many times before, hoping or praying for someone or something to take away the pain and shame of my addiction, and flushed it down the toilet again for the second night in a row. They say when Dallas flushes, it runs downhill to Houston. So some people in Houston may have had a little hop in their step those 2 nights. The quote unquote insanity of addiction, but we know it's not insane. It's a biological brain-based process that affects so many of us, our kids, ourselves, our spouses, our colleagues. And for me, it wasn't just flow. At 18 years old, as a freshman at Penn State, I had developed an eating disorder. I was bulimic. Yes, guys, you get eating disorders. About 30% of all those with eating disorders are male. By the time I was 21, I was an alcoholic, full-blown alcoholic at Penn State in University Park. By the time I was 25, I was addicted to cocaine. By the time I was 44, my first of 2 trips to a near psychiatric hospital after a near suicide attempt to a psychiatric hospital, jail, my 3 failed marriages, and then finally beginning my recovery in the weekend, April 8th, 2007. How does that happen? How does a young boy growing up in Pittsburgh, PA, happy, back in the baby boomer era, back when cell phones were 2 cups attached to a string, back when going viral meant 8 kids in the lunchroom were passing notes about you. How does that little boy grow up to be someone so awash in addiction and so hopeless in life that he decides to end it by suicide? Well, let's take a time machine back past June of 2006, the NBA championship, all the way to Pittsburgh into the 1970s. I'm the middle of 3 boys. My older brother, Mark, was the firstborn, was, as you might expect, he was outgoing, he was entrepreneurial, he was selling this door to door, he was selling that door to door. I remember when our local newspapers went on strike, back when print was a thing, he and his buddies drove to Cleveland, about 200 miles away from Pittsburgh, bought the Cleveland Plain dealer, bought a bunch of them, drove them back to Pittsburgh and sold them on a street corner during rush hour for twice what they paid for them. You kind of knew what he was going to be. My younger brother, Jeff, was a nationally ranked wrestler, good-looking kid, a jock, the beer parties, the dates, the prom, all of the things I associated with love and acceptance. I was classic middle child syndrome. I was shy, I was withdrawn, and I internalized anything negative said about me and wore it as who I was, like a skin tight suit. And I was also a heavy kid, trending towards obese. And I had a very difficult relationship with my mom. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about this, but I want to make it clear to everyone watching me or listening that I do not blame my mother for what I went through. There's a difference between cause and correlation. I went through with your parents, if anything, but there is a difference. Some people will go through the similar circumstances and take totally different paths. There was a lot of fat shaming in my household. I used to come home from school and I used to open the cabinet and pull out the cans of Chef Boyardee ravioli and beefaroni and SpaghettiOs. I loved it. And we didn't have an electric can opener. I go, and we didn't have a microwave, so I wouldn't even heat it up. I just stick the spoon in and start shoveling in my mouth and then go back to school. Every now and then, my mom would come home from selling real estate and she'd come home to eat lunch. And she'd walk in the kitchen and she would say, Brian, if you keep eating that way, you're going to be a fat pig. Now, these were the things my mother said to her. These were the things I suspect my great-grandmother said to my grandmother. Fat shaming in families is often handed down generationally. My mother had a very verbally and mentally abusive relationship with her diagnosed schizophrenic grandmother. It was awful. And my mother was going through psychiatric issues of her own at a time when a woman couldn't talk about needing a pill or needing to see someone. If you talked about having psychiatric issues, you could risk losing your child back in the 70s, to your husband or whatever. And so it was kind of just like contagious under the floorboards, where if it was ever talked about, everyone would get it. And so it was never talked about. But not understanding this as a young boy, I grew depressed to hear these things, and I was being bullied severely at school over my weight. And I began to eat more Chef Boyardee and more Chef Boyardee, and I became a bigger Brian and a bigger Brian. And as so often happens, when kids change for what other kids perceive in the negative of school, the bullying got worse. Brian, you're a fat pig. You must have talked to my mom. Brian, you need to go to Sears and Roebuck, back when that was a thing, and get a bra for your man boobs. And I developed a very self-deprecating sense of humor, like the sad clown, something I still deal with today. Because in my mind, these were the kids that I wanted to be with. Again, the prom king, the prom queens, the kids who were getting their first date, the kids who were getting their first kiss, the kids who were walking down between the high school lockers down the hallway holding hands. All the things I wanted so badly but didn't feel that fat pigs deserved. This all culminated in what I call the day of the gold pants. My brother Mark taught disco, believe it or not. 1976, I was a freshman in high school at the beginning of the disco era, and I see there are some people older it. And he would come home with these bell-bottom pants and these platform shoes that were 3 inches high. And one day he walked into my room and he was holding a pair of shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants. He said, Bri, you want these? I said, sure. I get up and I grab them. But they fit Mark okay. I had to jump up and down, spray the water bottle. My butt looked like 15 cats trying to get out. But I shoehorned into those pants and I wore them to school. And the kids made fun of me, as you might expect. And one day I'm walking home from school with this group of kids. Again, these are the popular kids. This is before the internet. my visions of popularity were the people I saw every day. It wasn't Instagram or TikTok or whatever. It was the people in the lunchroom, the people going to the football games and the concerts. And, but they were also some of the bullies. I'm walking home with these kids. It's a mile walk from the high school to my house in Pittsburgh. And they're making fun of my shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants. One of the kids reaches out right at the bulging zipper just below the belt loop, and he pulls and it rips. Another kid goes, ooh. He reaches out and he rips it right along the zipper, right down to my crotch. The next thing I knew, these kids had physically assaulted me like a pack of wild dogs. They tore off my shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants, tore them into shreds, down to my Fruit of the Loom tighty whities. I was wearing a Pittsburgh Pirates t-shirt as well. And they threw them out in the street, cars whizzing by, went on high-fiving, looking back, cubes, like they had done the funniest thing ever. I wait for traffic to lull. I go out in the street, I pick up the shreds. I cover up my Fruit of the Looms and I waddle home like a penguin. And that 1 mile walk of shame home might as well have been from Boston to Seattle. It felt like it was that long. And the worst part of that walk were the 2 stoplights. I remember them vividly. There were 2 stoplights, and those stoplights seemed to take forever as I stood there in my underwear, as people looked, as no one said a word. And I finally got home. The house was empty. It was funeral quiet. And I walked downstairs into our basement with the shreds. And it was these blue painted wooden stairs, and they creaked. And I remember never having noticed the creak before. But now every creak felt like a gunshot into a lake that formed where the bullet formed these ripples. And the ripples went out to my father, who said, what are you doing? You can't stand up to bullies? My ripples out to my mother would say, I told you so. And she wouldn't have said that. She loved me dearly. Who ripples out to my brother, dude, come on, stand up for yourself. They wouldn't do that. They would have said, who are these guys? We're going for it. But in the mind of a 14-year-old boy, it was real. Everything I projected was real as a documentary. And so I took those shreds. I found a wastebasket with newspapers, Chef Boyardee cans, trash, and I buried those shreds, hoping it would bury my shame, bury my trauma. But that's not how trauma and shame work. Trauma remembers, shame remembers, and they have a way of threading through our lives, even if we think we've compartmentalized it. I'm over that. And you find a place for it and you don't think about it, but it's there. It's just there. And suddenly it pops out in a destructive way. It pops out in a line of blow. It pops out in a drink. It pops out in all these different ways. And as a young boy, you may not, as a teenager, you may not even realize what's driving it. And what is important about this story that I just told? I think it's important because I view everyone as a continuum of snapshots in our lives that form kind of a skeleton of who we are. The person you see sitting next to you, whether it's in prison, whether it's in the courtroom, wherever, whether it's at work, the person is an accumulation of snapshots of joy, snapshots of trauma, snapshots of arrest, snapshots of death, snapshots of grief. And all these snapshots string together to kind of form the shell of who we are. And we fill it in with life experiences shaped by those snapshots. That's how I view it. That was the first snapshot in my life of major trauma. And I remember from that time starting to see my reflection and seeing nothing but a fat pig who wasn't worthy of love, who wasn't worthy of a girlfriend, who would never get married, who would never be loved by his mother. And, she did love me. And as you might imagine, I was very happy to move through high school I moved through with no friends. I kept to myself. And I went on to Penn State University, thinking it was going to be a whole new Brian. It was going to be great. I was going to meet people. I was going to finally have friends, be away from the bullies. And the ironic thing about that was a lot of these kids, because you're in Pittsburgh, Penn State's 150 miles away, they all went to Penn State. And so I'm facing these same kids again. I get up to Penn State. It's the first day. My father is helping me unpack. I'm in my dorm and I'm looking out the window. It's this beautiful fall day and the leaves are crisp and they're coming down. There's a chill in the air. And I make eye contact with this curly brown haired girl out in the parking lot who's talking to her friends, and her parents are behind her unpacking their car. And I start sweating, beads just coming down from my ears and my cheeks. And I imagine my entire life with this girl in 15 seconds. We're going to date, we're going to get married, and we're going to have 2.5 children. My life is great. This girl is, I'm going to have a girlfriend. And then in a sickening flick of a switch, a thud, I realized it wasn't a smile. It was a smirk. There's a difference. She looks at me, looks back at her friends, looks at me, puts her hand over her mouth just like this. Ugly, ugly. Now, I'm not the first kid to have a nasty thing said to him, right? Another kid may have said ugly back. Another kid may have flipped her off. Another kid may have given her the elbow salute. Another kid may have just said whatever. And I don't blame her either. But why? But it was, but I remember it because it was a moment where I thought, you know what? And I don't blame her. She's right. She is absolutely right. She has validated everything I believe about myself. I am ugly. I'm not worthy of her. How can I not be ugly? What does an 18-year-old boy, barely 18, have in his toolbox to not be ugly? Food. That's it. But if I ate more, I would get fatter and she would think I was really ugly. So I began to starve myself and restrict my food intake. And before I knew it, as an 18-year-old in 1979, before anyone was talking about eating disorders, I was a guy with an eating disorder. And I transitioned into binging and purging, bulimia. And this was before, who knows who Karen Carpenter is, the beautiful singer. She passed away from complications related to anorexia in 1983, bringing eating disorders into the pre-digital national spotlight, but kind of cementing it as the stereotype as a woman's disorder. That wouldn't happen for 4 years. And so here I am, a guy engaging in these behaviors. But what I knew is that every time I did that, every time I binged and purged, I had this feeling of peace that would come over me. The peace that everything was going to be okay. The peace that the next day that girl would like me. The next day my mother would love me. But then when that peace went away, it was almost like when the cocaine high would wear off later in life. In swept the shame of engaging in an act that I did not understand, did not have a name for, but had to do again and again and again to feel that peace. But there was a problem. I still saw that fat pig in the mirror, whether it was my dormitory bathroom mirror, the car window, the classroom window. It wasn't working. And I began drinking and drinking and drinking because I decided I just didn't want to feel it all. If I couldn't feel good about myself, I wouldn't feel. And going into my sophomore year at Penn State, I was a full-blown alcoholic. I was drinking before class. I was drinking at night. I was going out to the bars in State College, PA, going to the state store and buying these little bottles of tequila, drinking them out in the alley where the bars were, swigging them to get drunk so I can go in and get drunker and maybe be a different Brian. Didn't work, right? So, but I just kept drinking so I didn't feel. I was a criminal justice major at Penn State. I wanted to be a police officer. That would have worked out well. I'd have been the first guy in the evidence room trading out the baby laxative for the blow, believe me. You know, I'd have been in jail from that. And I'm sitting in the placement office one day, this is before computers, and I'm looking through all these police officer jobs that the different communities would send to the criminal justice programs. And there are two guys sitting next to me, and they're talking about taking the law school admission test. And I start listening to them. And the bells start going off in my head. Not the bells of I want to be a lawyer, not the bells of I want to emulate Atticus Finch or be the next Clarence Darrow. The bells of law school is 3 years. If I go to law school, I can spend another 3 years drinking, binging and purging, and engaging in the behaviors that had become my security blanket, like Linus takes around and Snoopy, that have allowed me to survive. And that's all I wanted to do was survive and exist. I wasn't thinking about the future. I was thinking the tip of my nose, as often happens with alcoholism and addiction. And so I went on to Pitt University of Pittsburgh School of Law, walked through the door as an alcoholic, walked through the door with my eating disorder, not quite the resume for law review. Now struggling with major depressive episodes as well, which I drank to kind of avoid, which only made it worse. But now I'm 22 and didn't know any better. And as you might imagine, I was at the bottom of my class. I mean, it was close to not graduating. Because all I was doing was drinking. I was going to class drunk. I was drinking at night, drinking alone, rinse, wash, repeat, engaging in these behaviors. But unlike college, you actually have to study in law school. And so I didn't do very well. And I graduated by the skin of my teeth. And I was so ashamed and apathetic, I didn't even bother going to graduation. Just mail it to me. Just mail it to me. The serendipitous thing about that, however, was back during the pandemic in 2020, they invited me back to keynote their commencement. And so I wore the cap and gown for the first time. So everything comes around. Fortunately, everything came around. But this wasn't then. Rinse, wash, repeat. I walked out of Pitt Law as an alcoholic. What am I going to do with my life? Well, if I'm not going to be able to get a job as a lawyer in a law firm. I could hang out a shingle, but then I actually have to go out and actually be productive in the world. I took the Pennsylvania bar. I got a Greyhound bus with $200 to my name, and I took it to Dallas, Texas, the summer of 1986, or the Labor Day 1986. My brother Mark met me at the Greyhound bus station. I moved in with him, and it was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Because they were going out, they're young, they didn't do drugs, but they're dating, they're drinking, going to the bars. I fit right in. My drinking escalated. I failed the Texas bar exam 3 times as a result of drugs and alcohol. The first time I took the Texas bar exam, my study aides, the weekend before the exam, in a roadway motel, were an 8-ball of cocaine, a fifth of Jack Daniels, and a liter of Tab. I love Tab. And as you might imagine, I didn't pass, and I would fail 2 more times before finally becoming a Texas licensed attorney. But backtracking and moving in with Mark, finally in the summer of 1987, I discovered the one thing that finally allowed me to look in the mirror and love myself for the first time in my 26 years. What do you think that was? Cocaine. I did my first line of cocaine in that bathroom in that nightclub. And I looked in that mirror and it was, yeah, baby. Ryan's going upstairs. I remember that girl. Maybe even that curly brown haired girl's up there. Yeah, Brian going up there, yeah. But then it wears off. Brian hates Brian again. Brian has to love Brian again. Where's that dealer? Found the dealer, gave him my last $100, went back downstairs, and Brian loved Brian again, and again, and again, and again. And I would become very quickly psychologically dependent on that feeling. And then I would become physically dependent as well. And cocaine and alcohol took over my life as a lawyer. I became a plaintiff's lawyer, a very unethical plaintiff's lawyer. I was Better Call Saul without the drug cartels. I really was. And I finally lost all my clients. I got arrested in 1991 after my first EWI and went to jail. And then finally, in the summer of 2005, I became so hopeless that I would never, ever look in the mirror and love myself, that I was a stain, that I decided I was just a stain on the Cuban on the Cuban name, and they would be better off without me. And I decided to end my life by suicide. And it was close. At the urging of a friend, they came into my house. My younger brother came first. Mark flew in from LA. I had a .45 automatic on my nightstand. There was cocaine everywhere. There was black market Xanax everywhere. I was Xanaxing through the day and cocaining through the night. Well, how can you practice law like that? Well, I've done cocaine in the federal courthouse, the state courthouse. I remember going to a jury trial I wasn't ready for. I pulled over to the side of the highway and snorted it off the back of my hand. I mean, you know how it is if you've been there. Addiction doesn't, what is addiction? Obsessive compulsive drug seeking behavior despite known and probable consequences, right? Of course, I knew I could go to prison, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop. And my brothers took me kicking and screaming in my first of 2 trips to a Green Oak Psychiatric Hospital here in Dallas, kicking and screaming. They're trying to save my life. All I can think of is get out of my life and let me go back to the people who truly love me, at least until the blow is gone. Much to their chagrin, I knew what to say, so they couldn't put a psychiatric hold on me, not an immediate danger to myself, or others. So they had to take me back home, and we did what I call the Cuban rehab. They said, stay in your house for 2 weeks. Everything's going to be okay. That's not how it works either, but my family was learning as they went. I had a couple thoughts to that. One, no problem, my drug dealer delivers, the Dallas Maps tickets guy. And 2, now they know. Now they really know. So what am I going to do? Am I going to go to 12-step? Nah. Am I going to go to rehab? Nah. Am I going to white turkey sobriety? Nah. I'm just going to bring the party to me. And that's what I did. And that's what I did. And here's where extreme privilege comes in. Extreme. And I acknowledge my privilege. It would be disingenuous not to. Very few people have a billionaire brother who is willing to do anything for them. Health insurance is a privilege. Having financial is a privilege. Skin color privilege. I had privilege on multiple levels. Doesn't mean I was going to take advantage of it, and I didn't. And that's what I did. I brought the party to me, and my brother Mark put me to work for him, trying to kind of pull me up by the bootstraps. And I was in meetings with some of the most important people in Dallas. Rinse, wash, repeat. High, hungover, low-level drunk after being out all night. And Mark had to pull me out of that. So now I'm just existing as a schlub, right? With no future, no past, just existing. And after the near suicide attempt, I just went into my own cocoon of drug use and partying. And then in the fall of literally January 2006, I'm out at one of my week-long birthdays, that started when the cocaine started and ended when the cocaine ended. And I'm in this bar and I meet this girl. Her name is Amanda. And I must have had on one of the last believable Phantom of the Opera masks that we put on when we're struggling to convince people that we are these upstanding people and all is good in the world, right? And I literally had the last one on, and we started dating. She moved in with me. And I remember when she moved in with me, a buddy asked me, you do what you do. She doesn't do what you do. How does that work? How's that going to work? I said, I'm going to stop. I'm ready. So I'm in the stage of change, right? Thinking about it, the stages of change. But you can go in and out of the stages of change. And I didn't stop. I just became very good at what I did. Yeah, she didn't know. Easter weekend 2007, she goes away to visit her family. I go out thinking, okay, I'm going to go out. I'm going to party. I'm going to blow it out literally. She'll be back Sunday. It's Friday and I'll be washed. Everything's good. She'll never know. Well, suddenly it's 2 days later. I'm in bed. She's looking down at me. There's cocaine everywhere. I'm trying to get my bearings. 2 days have passed. I had a blackout. I had a drug and cocaine-induced blackout in a Xanax as well. She's a lawyer. She's probably trying to figure out if she walked in the right house. I'm trying to figure out what lie I can tell to explain this Law and Order episode orgy of evidence that I just might not be the person I represented myself to be. And all I could think of was a metaphorical running home to mama. I said, take me back, and I named the psychiatric facility. What, you've been to a psychiatric facility? Yeah, we'll talk about that later. I just need time to think of a good lie to explain what there is no other explanation for. So we go back down. We're standing in the parking lot, me for the second time in my life. She's crying. And a few things occurred to me. One, there wouldn't be a third trip back. I'd be dead. Two, she was going to leave me. I'd leave. Sure. She didn't. She stood by me. We dated for over a decade while I rebuilt the broken trust and found recovery. And now we've been married going on 8 years and together almost 19. So not all relationships will survive it, but ours was able to because one, she's a saint. And two, I had to do the work for me, right? Couldn't do it for her because she could leave. Couldn't do it for my parents because I've lost both my parents in recovery. Couldn't do it for my pets. I lost pets in recovery. Had to do it for me. And I thought about my father, the last thing I thought about. My father, who was a CB, a veteran of the Pacific, fought in Okinawa. He fought in Korea. He was the middle of three boys like me. And I remember what he said to my two brothers and I all the time. He said, guys, wherever you go in life, whatever happens, pick up that phone, call your brother you love him. Tell your brother you love him. Call your brother and make sure he's okay, whether it's across the state, across the world. He was giving us the gift of family that he had, the gift that he had with his two brothers. He was passing that down. And if you want to know how that stuck, all these decades later, 1,200 miles from Pittsburgh, here in Dallas, Mark, Jeff, and I live walking distance to each other. Not an accident. Until my father passed away in 2018, he lived across the street from me, literally, not an accident. And I thought about that and I was ready. So the next day I walked into my psychiatrist's office, who I've been lying to. Why would you lie to your psychiatrist? Well, shame knows no hourly rate. I was ashamed. I was carrying that shame of that little boy. And I finally started getting honest. And he said, would you go to treatment? And I can't go to treatment. I'm too busy. I have no clients. Would you consider 12-step? The meeting room was, the home group was literally next door. I can't go to 12-step, doctor. I see them smoking out there. Secondhand smoke will kill you, right? There's always a reason not to recover. But I knew I had to do something to show my brothers, show myself, show who I thought was going to be my ex-girlfriend. She moved out. And so I walked into the rooms of 12-step Easter weekend 2007. I sat down in that comfortable hunk of plastic, crying, sweating. And you know what was on my mind when I sat down in the corner of that room of my continued home group? It wasn't alcoholic, the word. It wasn't whether I was. What was in my mind was that if sitting in this chair will allow me to wake up for the first time in my life, walk to my bathroom mirror, birthday suit naked, look at myself and tell myself, I love you. And it's okay however you look. And you are loved, that I would sit. Because for many years, I wasn't even able to look at myself. I would avoid mirrors. I would avoid windows. If I could just look at myself once and love myself without the aid of cocaine or alcohol, I would sit. And I sat and I sat and I sat. And I'm still sitting today. And I'm still seeing a psychiatrist today. And I'm still taking antidepressants today. And I'll tell you, the one thing I learned during that journey, particularly in the legal profession, but I think it applies universally, is that it is so, mutual aid is just so important, even if it's not in the rooms at 12-step. Just, what I call the 2-ask rule, to look at someone who might be struggling and you don't know why. It may not be alcohol. Maybe they just had a bad day, a fight with somebody, a fight at home. And you say, are you doing okay? We do that all the time, just in passing. How you doing? But we say it in passing as throwaway. But are you doing okay? And before that conversation breaks, if you want to talk, I'm here. And the kicker to that is to mean it, right? The kicker to that is to mean it. It can't be throwaway like we do so much in our lives. And that's what I've tried to do in my life now. I write, I do all this, but, just there's a saying in the Jewish tradition, kind of a Kabbalistic saying called tikkun olam, changing the world with acts of kindness, social good. And with the 2-ask rule, that's what I try to do. Whether it's, here or somebody who's struggling, and I would encourage, all of you, if you're not doing it, to do the same. Thank you.
Brian, thank you so much. An incredible, incredible presentation. I feel so fortunate to have been able to hear you tonight. If you have a little time, we're gonna.
Yeah, I have time.
That's great. If you would like to ask Brian a question or share your experience about any of the topics Brian talked about, please put your name in chat and I will call on you. First up is Bill.
Brian, thank you so much. Um, just really just riveting, and thing that you ended with, the two ask rule. I don't know if it's a guy thing in particular, but I know that it happens to women too. What is it, do you think, that makes people afraid to ask for help?
Projection is, I think projection is a lot of it, because at least for me, I try to speak from only personal experience, right? Because I'm only an expert in my story. I grew up with so much trauma and so much embedded shame, and being so afraid of asking for help, especially in the 70s, right, and 80s, that it was ingrained in my head, even as a rational lawyer, a rational adult, that I would get ridiculed, that I would be told no, and projection becomes reality, right? And to give you a perfect example, when I would with my psychiatrist with the eating disorder, that was the very last thing I told him about it, because even as an adult, I was so stigmatized and so ashamed that I thought I was the only person, the only guy, middle-aged guy in the world struggling with an eating disorder. And I think that all comes from the snapshots that string together, that we project out, it's self-preservation, right? We project out the answers that we can say, okay, I'm glad I didn't ask. Because the voices in our head tell us what we're going to hear. And those voices are very rarely embedded in reality. That's my take on it, based on my personal.
Yeah, because that's something we see a lot in our group too.
Yeah.
People are just afraid, and your perspective on it and through your journey helps me understand it a lot more. So I really
think
appreciate
there's a lot
that.
of projection, because coping mechanisms that have been learned throughout life, right, are very tough to dispel without a lot of hard work. And remember, you don't know you may not know what the snapshots are.
Very true. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Let's see. We're looking for names in chat. Anyone? Naya.
Hi, that was incredible. And as a longtime educator, your beginning of your story was really compelling, because I saw the impact of bullying on so many young people. So, but I just, if you had to name a few things um that really helped you to overcome, what would you say those three key things were that helped you to overcome all of that you were going through?
I don't know, overcome. I've developed a toolbox. Like, for instance, self-image and body image is still a very difficult struggle for me. Very, very difficult. But I have a toolbox, right? So I know I am not my thoughts. But learning to love myself the best I can, as going through life. And we have to remember, everyone looks in the mirror one day or another and says, that sucks. I'm having a bad this day, a bad that day. Oh, yeah, I'm not going to that party. This just doesn't happen, or this event. That's normative discontent. That is not a disorder. That is what people generally go through. But it has taken a lot of therapy, a lot of self-love, a lot of self-positive self-talk for me to for the thought I had in AA to really take hold, right, of loving myself. It wasn't as easy as just sitting there. I'm still in therapy today. Two, a lot of meditation, a lot of introspection in terms of understanding that I can't control everything around me. right? And especially, and this comes true especially, I've had to deal with this a lot, and with my last name. Okay, my brother was very active in the election, especially if you get online in any event. You should see some of the just horrific emails. I just that the nasty. Someone called my wife a whore. Someone, said they hope my family dies, and send me these emails, and I'm not even running. I'm just a guy, and so there's a lot of that is unique to my situation that has really I've had to learn, but it has been a very, I want to say, beneficial internal process, because I have to remember that this has nothing to do with me, right? These feelings, these thoughts have nothing to do with me. These are things I cannot control. So once I internalize them, I've let these things become me, and I've let that control me. So that has always been very important to me. And no one likes to get emails like that. But the whole process has really, I would say, helped me. Help me in understanding that, these things are not who I am, it's who they are. And so I would say those are the two big things. And like I said, I'm still in therapy today, which again is privilege, but it's been very helpful.
Thank you, Naya. Great question. Tom's next, and we can use more names in chat, please.
Thank you, Jeff. Brian, let me just say, first of all, that maybe this will make you feel better, but I really enjoyed and was very impressed by what your brother did in commentary during the election. It made me feel a lot better about him.
Oh, and people can disagree, right? People can disagree. That's fine. You have two parties. But I started taking a lot of shrapnel.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate. But one of the things, your story is absolutely incredible, and one of the reasons why is it's the story of a guy who is in one way, very normal, but in another way, it's sort of highlighted by the fact that you are in the family that you're in. And I just was riveted listening to you. This is the second time I've had the chance to listen to you, and I think you have a lot to tell people, a lot to tell people about how, the emblems of success, aren't necessarily the whole story. The other thing I'd like to tell you is that I had the problems that I had, and I wasn't addicted to narcotics or alcohol or anything like that. But when you were talking about the Chef Boyardee, because you're about the same age as I am, when I got home, there was either a box of Devil Dogs, and I still love Devil Dogs, or I would actually take the Nestle's Quick, and I got to the point where I didn't even bother with the milk. I just
I think I did that too.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes me feel better. But again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I am looking, next is Greg.
Yeah, Brian, really thank you for sharing. That is such an inspirational story, and how you tell it is just riveting. I feel like I could listen to you for hours, and I relate to it as well. I recall being a kid. I was the youngest of five boys, so my mom was always cooking, and she wasn't the kind who said, if you eat a lot, you're going to get fat. She would say, eat more, clean your plate, come up for seconds. And I remember, especially in middle school, really struggling with, and I don't think I was that overweight, but in my mind, I was. And just how you tell that part of the story just really, really impacted me. And I'm so thankful for you that you're willing to share and be as vulnerable as you are. And I suspect, given your name, as you said, I would think it would be challenging sometimes to put it all out there like that. And yet you're really doing a great service. And I just hope you'll continue to
Thanks.
to tell
Yeah.
your story, because I do think your name, it may be a double-edged sword. Maybe sometimes it's, I know, I think I'm probably here tonight because your last name is Cuban. And I thought, I want to hear this story because I recognize the name, even though I didn't know anything about you coming into this,
Yeah.
this call. And I just thank you again for being open and for sharing and being vulnerable and understanding you're talking to a group that I think really relates to your story. Maybe not the specifics, but there's a lot of things going through my head as you were speaking that said, boy, that's hitting home.
But you know what, Greg? All kids can relate to wanting to be loved, right?
Yeah.
Wanting to be accepted, not wanting to be
Yeah.
bullied.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the truth. And it all starts when we're young.
Yeah.
And some of those things we carry for our whole lives. And you know, the fact you've addressed it, I mean, or at least you've tried to address it, I give you a lot of credit for, because just as you were answering Bill's question, it's so easy. And I did this, you know, I ignored it, right? I just pushed it down. And I thought, you know, it's and I'm probably similar to your age. You couldn't talk about it back then.
Yeah.
You couldn't say you had an eating issue, or you know, even though people would look at you and say, well, you probably have eaten too many of your mom's cookies, but
Yeah, they say just stop.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I have to go to a 12-step meeting. So thank you very much. And Jeff, thank you for having me.
All right, Brian, thank you so much for your talk tonight. Thank you for answering some of our questions. And just a reminder, everyone, our White Collar Support Group meets on Monday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. You can find out more information on prisonist.org. That's prisonist like feminist.org. Brian Cuban, our guest speaker, can be reached at briancuban.com, which is his website.
Yeah. And if you have any questions, just reach out. I mean, I'm an open book.
That's great. So, Brian, thank you so much for being with us tonight. We so appreciate it. And good luck with your new book. Here, I'm going to hold
Thank
it
you.
up again. There's The Body Brokers. And please, on Amazon, on Barnes & Noble, wherever you're going to buy it, you can buy it. And thank you, Brian.
Thanks, everyone. Time to go work more on my sobriety. Take care.
See you guys. Thank you,
everybody.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you.